from that, from knowing what are the pieces of the application, to knowing what is an admissions officer going to think about those pieces that I send in. So this presentation takes place in roughly 3 phases. In the first phase, I'm going to teach you to think like me. I'm going to teach you to think about merit the way I think about merit, think about academics the way I think about academics, and talent the way I think about talent. I'm going to teach you about institutional priorities. I'm going to show you the things that we use to train new admissions officers at Tufts, so that you learn to be an admissions officer. In the second phase, I'm going to show you what an applicant pool looks like at a highly selective American college or university. You know what it looks like when you send in your application, but what does it look like when I receive 16,400 applications for a freshman class of 1,300 students? What does that volume look like statistically? What is it? Where do you fit into it? How does it break down? And what does that mean for you? And then in the final phase, we're going to do the really fun stuff. I mean, the first 2 phases are fun, but this is the really fun part. We're going to do a mock admissions exercise. I'm going to present to you the materials of 6 actual applicants to the university in the past. And I will present them to you in an approximation of how those materials were presented in the admissions committee, where people were actually voting to admit or deny. How does your 500-word essay get distilled into a 2-sentence soundbite? Sound interesting? And you're going to vote. I'm going to make you pick the 2 kids we admit out of the 6, and then I'm going to make you argue for them. You all have to vote, and if you vote, you must be willing to verbalize, to say out loud why you are voting for the person you are voting for. And since you all have to vote, you all have to be willing to argue. My favorite thing about it is when a parent says one thing and a student disagrees with the parent, and they had it right there in the room, and I love that. And we're going to do it that way because, just like reading a mock application doesn't teach you to think about the pieces the way I think about them, reading a mock application doesn't teach you how someone gets in. People are admitted not when the application is read, they're admitted during the debate that unfolds when that application is finally presented to a group of other admissions officers. And you're going to be admissions officers after I teach you how. So this program is entitled Behind Closed Doors. I named it that way. This is a quote from a U.S. higher education trade publication inside higher ed. This is a line: the image of admissions officers as gatekeepers is a powerful one in American culture. Part of the mystique is that what they do goes on behind closed doors. That the reason you are all so interested in the admissions process is not just because, it matters to your futures, but because you don't know what we do. It's a secret. And most of the time, if you ask an admissions officer to talk about the admissions process, they will say something like, well, we have a holistic admissions process. We have a lot of different variables, and they all matter. So I can't tell you what we do, which is really unsatisfying and really frustrating. And what we're going to do in the course of this presentation is open sesame. I'm going to open the doors and show you what it looks like. So what is my job when I'm evaluating an application? When I'm looking at an application, my job, my purpose is to assess merit. And merit has a lot of different forms, some of which are obvious. There's academic merit. This is what everybody uses all over the world. Your grades, your marks, your test scores. If you apply to university in Japan, there's an entrance examination. If you apply to schools in Korea, there's the Collegiate Scholastic Aptitude Test. If you're applying to schools in the UK, there are the A-levels, there's the Abitur in Germany, the French Bac in France, the Gaokao in China. Everyone all around the world has some kind of metric, and we do too. And your ability to perform in a classroom is a form of merit. The remainder of this is where the United States starts to become different. We are essentially the only system of higher education in the world that cares about these things after academic achievement. If you ask UK schools about your extracurricular involvements, they will flat out tell you they do not care. Oh, you're a championship horseback rider? I don't care. You're great at music? You don't want to study music. I don't care. And we value those things. And part of the reason we value those things is because pedagogically, in terms of educational philosophy, U.S. higher education is fundamentally different from everywhere else all around the world. Outside the United States, higher education, university education, is about efficiency. Producing the maximum number of graduates possible in the minimum amount of time for the smallest amount of money. In and out as fast as we can get it. Which is great, because it produces a lot of diplomas. But that is not the way the U.S. system works. The U.S. system says we don't want to produce the largest number of graduates, we want to produce the largest number of learning opportunities for each of those graduates. We're going to include a whole bunch of things in our educational programs and in the experiences in our schools that have nothing to do with you getting your degree and a lot to do with you learning. If you come to Tufts or to another American school to study physics, there is no benefit to taking a class in economics towards getting your physics degree. But if you understand how science is funded and where that money comes from, you will be a better physicist. We have school newspapers and music programs and athletic programs and publications and study abroad and a whole range of things that you can do extracurricularly on our campuses that are about giving you an opportunity to learn, not about getting you your degree as fast and as cheaply as you possibly can do it. Which is why we now do these things. If we're going to place priority on the experiences that students have outside the classroom, we need a group of students who are going to be engaged and talented at the things they do outside the classroom. And that's why talent matters. Voice matters, your personal qualities matter, because if you have a room full of people who are exactly the same, no one will learn. If everyone agrees on the same political perspective, how are you going to have an interesting debate on politics? If you have a community of engineers and everyone thinks logically and no one thinks creatively, that's a deficit. We want to produce not only a class of people who are talented and smart and able to learn and able to achieve, but a class of people who will teach each other things because they are different enough to learn from each other. Which means we have to specifically look for some things. We have to look for gender balance in sciences and in humanities. We have to look for socioeconomic and ethnic diversity, and for geographic origin, and for intellectual curiosity and engagement, and a point of view that is different from your peers. And the point about intellectual curiosity, you'll notice that curiosity is in a separate bullet than academic achievement. Curiosity and achievement are not the same thing. Some of you, in some of your classes, will get punished for demonstrating curiosity in your grades, because you will do things in a way your teachers don't want you to do. You follow your own instinct, you follow your own curiosity, and as a result, you are not doing the assignments anymore. And your grade will drop. And you know people who are incredibly high achieving and who never ask the smart questions. They do well in class, they do well in their grades, and they don't push. They don't challenge the instructors, they don't challenge you. And these things matter. Our professors need to be challenged. The more you push them, the more they will push themselves. And if they are inspired by you, they will do better work. And this is another thing the UK doesn't care about. The UK does not care if you inspire your teachers. I heard them say that. When they ask for the teacher references, I've heard UCAS schools say, we don't care if you like your students, just tell us that they're good. And this is really different than what we value in the United States. Because if we have a professor with a classroom of students they hate, they're not going to like teaching. And if they don't like teaching, their scholarship suffers. And if their scholarship suffers, we look bad. And so we place emphasis on a lot of these qualities. And then there's institutional priorities, that's the last bullet. I'm going to come back around and I'm going to talk about institutional priorities. This is the sexy, dirty part of admissions. This is the part where you're like, oh my god, it's so unfair. And you know what? Sometimes it is, but too bad, they matter. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. And I'm going to go through each of these and I'm going to give you a little bit more background. Data, academic achievement. We assess academic achievement, we assess the merit of your academics by looking at three broad categories. Your curricular rigor, how hard are the classes you are taking. Your grades, how successful have you been in those classes, with particular emphasis on your final 2 years. We look at your testing on the SAT or the ACT, and not every school in the States requires standardized testing, but a lot of us do, and usually the more selective schools do, and for those of us that require it, it does matter. This is not just the order we look at these things, then grades, then test scores. And it's not that your test scores aren't valuable. They are. They just matter a little bit less than your work over the last 4 years. Having said that, though, even within that very straightforward category of rigor, grades, and testing, there's a lot of variation. I need to be able to take every application that I read from Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Washington, D.C., Thailand, Japan. The territories I'm responsible for are Asia, except for South Asia and Korea, and Maryland inside the United States. That's what I read. So Maryland, Asia. Okay. And I have to be able to take all the applicants that come from all these different educational systems. Some are British derivatives, some are not, some are IB, some are US. There's all a range of different things. You know, the Vietnamese system uses a 10-point scale, the Thai system uses a 5-point scale. Like, I have to know all those things. And then I have to be able to take all these students who come from all these different backgrounds and put them on our scale. And I have to do that using the context of their background. And this is another thing that makes the United States different. We use the story of your life in understanding your academics. If there are two students, one of which is in the United States, an American living in Connecticut, born to Americans, speaking English in school and at home, in a wealthy, affluent suburb where SAT prep is part of the high school curriculum, and these schools exist. And that student has a 650 on the English section of the SAT. And you have another student applying from Vietnam, and that Vietnamese student is attending a Vietnamese school where Vietnamese is the language of instruction, their parents speak Vietnamese, their friends only speak Vietnamese, Vietnamese is the language on the street, and this student managed to teach him or herself English using the 1 hour of instruction every day in the school, the books they can find in the library, and the movies they can find on television. And that student also has a 650 on the SATs. So you have two students, one in Connecticut, one in Vietnam, with the same score. But which of them really has the better score? I don't think there's any controversy about that. I don't think there's any way you could argue otherwise. And if you feel that that's unfair, and when I do this in Connecticut, sometimes they do feel that that's unfair. But if you feel that's unfair, come on, challenge me. I'm open. And I will win that argument. And so some of you come from backgrounds where English is not the language in your home, but it is the language in your school. Or where English is the language in your school, but you've only been English leading in school for the last 2 years. Or English is the language of your home and the language of your school, but not the language on the street. Or English is the language of your home, the language in your school, but your parents don't have an education. Or you don't have the money to afford the kind of tutoring that your peers have or that the kids in Connecticut get. And there are all these different ways in which you can take the academics and put them in context to better understand what's happening. So I picked two really extreme examples with the kid in Connecticut and the kid in Vietnam. And the truth is there's an endless amount of gray in between and an endless amount of subcategories you can fall into. But I'm looking at that. It's like looking at how long it takes someone to run a race. If you know how long it took them, but you don't know how long the race was, you don't know who the best runners are. Having said that, though, the bottom line for all the academic reviews is I need to be able to certify to the Dean of Admissions at Tufts and to our faculty that every student that we take from Asia, or from Latin America, or for that matter from Maryland, is qualified to come to Tufts and graduate on time in 4 years without failing a class. That is my bottom line. I cannot, under any circumstances, admit a student who is not capable of doing that, regardless of these other pieces of context. And then there's everything that's not data. And everything that's not data, talent and voice, demographics, is the stuff that we gather from all the pieces of your application that are not numerical. From your extracurricular list, from your essays, from your recommendations, from an interview if you have one, from a whole range of different things that we ask you to send to us that nobody else really cares about. What we're asking you to write in your essays, if you're applying to a variety of different countries, you might notice that the US system asks you to do things that nobody else is asking you to do. And we ask you to do those things because how else are we supposed to acquire the information on your personality and your background